Okay, we're here with Ron Petersen, and we're doing an interview. I'm Don Pfister.
And I'm not.
And this is Ron Petersen.
And I'm Meredith Blackwell, and this is part of the Oral History for Mycology project. So we're glad you're watching. And so what we want to do is talk to Ron about his career, which spans several different techniques.
Centuries.
But techniques.
Well, that too.
And different groups.
Yes. And so we'll start asking Ron about his early life. Were you born legitimately?
Some people think so.
Good.
Yeah, especially the woman that gave birth to me. Yes, I was born legitimately in Jersey City, New Jersey, and that was a place where Boss Haig.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, and I was a very deep depression baby, 1934. That sounds like an answer, but it really ended right there.
Well, tell us about your family.
My family, Karen, about 2 years ago, gave me a 1-year subscription to Ancestry.com. So I learned a lot more about my family than I knew before. And I am 98% Northern European. One side of my family came from a place called Schleswig-Holstein.
I've heard of that in history class.
And that has kicked around between Denmark and Germany, and that accounts for the SEN on my name.
Uh-huh.
And the other part of my family comes from Alsace-Lorraine.
Mine too.
And it kicked around between France and Germany. So I'm a mixed breed.
Well, that's sort of what I am. Alsatian and Northern European,
Really?
according to Ancestry.
There was a guy by the name of de Wildeman in Strasbourg, and he did some aquatic algae that he thought were algae, and they turned out to be fungi. And my great-grandfather's name was Wildeman, but he was a baker. And I suspect he didn't know his uncle, Mr. de Wildeman, the mycologist.
Interesting.
So I'm remembering, did you go off to Colgate?
I did.
Yeah.
I own 2 T-shirts from Colgate
Okay.
that I wear religiously.
All right. I'm not sure why I remembered that, but I did know that you had gone to Colgate.
Why was that of interest to you?
Well, this upstate New York stuff, and I was at Cornell, and
Oh, yeah, but you were there for a different degree.
I was indeed, yes. But
I went there for that same degree.
To where?
You went where?
You went to Columbia.
Cornell.
Yeah.
Lasted 1 semester.
I thought there was something there too.
Who
And who were you working with?
Richard Korff.
Okay.
And so then you went to Columbia?
I did, because I flunked out of Cornell.
You flunked out.
Yes.
You must not have gone to class.
Now, if you want a 20-minute interview, I can do the next 18 minutes on how come I flunked out of Cornell, but I'm not sure that's interesting to you.
Well, I think it's
Might be.
intriguing.
Might be.
Colgate was an extended family. And I went there and immediately fell into a support group of other freshmen. I got into a fraternity, and that was more support group. And then I went to Cornell, and the bottom fell out of all the support groups. And I turned out to be a very lonely guy. And that meant that dictated to me, having come from northern New Jersey, I can go home for the weekends. There was a plant pathology course that was taught on Friday afternoons in the lab. It was called Plant Pathology 1.
Yeah.
Yes? And that was the one I had to miss if I wanted to drive home for the weekend.
Well, that wouldn't work. Yeah.
It didn't work. And at the end of the semester, they gathered 5 professors around a table to quiz me as using the excuse that this is the final exam, an oral exam on Plant Pathology 1,
Okay.
which I did not do well in.
Do you remember who was teaching that?
Boothroyd.
Carl Boothroyd. He was teaching it when I was there as a graduate student. too.
When were you there?
71 to
Oh.
74. No, 68 to 67 to 67
memorable
to
year.
71. Yeah.
Okay, so let's leave Cornell and go
Yeah.
to Columbia. Why did you pick Columbia?
Because I had applied to Columbia at the same time I applied to Cornell, and I had been accepted at Columbia as well as Cornell. And so when Cornell had the perspicacity of saying no thank you to me, I had Columbia to fall back on.
Good.
Yeah.
And you worked with Lindsay Olive?
I went there as a provisional student because of my career at Cornell, and I promptly got a C in mycology under Lindsay Olive, and he gave me some extra work that I could do to raise it to a B minus. That's how I became a mycologist. It's called scraping through.
So you work in a very different area from what I think of Olive as working on.
Yes, he thought so too.
But what did you work on there? You were working on hyphomycetes, right?
That's because he decided, after another tale that I could tell you, he said to me one afternoon, you know what? You are a taxonomist. You are not a geneticist. Because he had me working on genetics things. He had me working on a little coprinus called Coprinus ephemeris, although I suspect it might not have been that. And that was coincident with the late discovery of isotopes and their use in looking at things.
Right,
You know,
right.
Tradescantia
Yeah,
hairs
yeah.
and so forth. And he had me putting Coprinus spores under a UV lamp, and the lo and behold, when you then plated out those spores, I got a white spored Coprinus, and I announced to him that I think I have a new genus. Coprinus has to have black spores. I've got a white spored Coprinus.
You made it.
And he was not impressed.
So how did you ever finish?
I finished there, but he decided that I was a taxonomist, and that's another story. So I wound up looking. Cecil Terence Ingold's papers had just become coming out, and Lindsay Olive was fascinated by these spore forms and so forth. So he took me up to the New York Botanical Garden, where next to a trail there was a little spring, and he said, go get some water samples from that and we'll see what's in there. And I thought this was cold water, and I thought there's not going to be anything in here, but there were 2 or 3 different aquatic hyphomycetes in there, and the rest is history, as they say.
But then you became a geneticist,
I did not.
kind of.
I did not.
Mating studies.
Well, yeah, I backed into that.
So
The story is I was in China, and I was looking for clavarioid fungi. Go back another generation. Clark Rogerson and I in a car in Highlands, North Carolina. I was still just about finished with my PhD. And the grand total of these aquatic hyphomycetes that had been described was in the number of 44. I already had 42 from the New York area and the mountains of the Southern Appalachians. Now that sounds like diminishing returns to me. Not only that, but I wanted part of the action, and the action was mushroomoids, fleshy fungi. Okay, now who's doing the hidnums? Ken Harrison's doing the hidnums. Who's doing the mushrooms? Alex Smith. Who's doing the telephoras? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? And silence fell in the car. All the groups were taken. And about a half hour later, Clark said, nobody's doing the clavarias. I said, I am. And I spent the next, 25 years doing clavarioid fungi.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got to get you to Tennessee. You didn't
Yes.
do a postdoc in those at that time, or did you?
First of all, I went to the University of Buffalo, New York,
Oh, okay.
which was then bought out by SUNY. And that became SUNY Buffalo, one of the 4 gems of the SUNY system. And the tenor of the campus changed. An influx of money that you wouldn't believe. This was under Nelson Rockefeller, who had a bunch himself. And I got more and more a fish out of water. I was a taxonomist. I went in the field. Nobody understood that in this department that I found myself in, because we were now part of the medical school.
And you were there as an assistant professor?
I was.
Yeah.
I got there in 1961, and I left there 1st of January 65. And I had been down with Clark Rogerson down to the biological station at Highlands, and we had been invited to come across the mountains and collect with Hessler. And so we did that not once but twice, 2 years in a row. Went back to Buffalo, of course, and decided I was getting restless, but there was a job open at North Carolina State, the one that Royal Moore eventually got. And I wrote to Hessler and asked him for a letter of recommendation. And he said he'd be happy to write one, but did I know that there was a position open at Tennessee? I did not know there was a position open at Tennessee, and nobody else did either. But Hessler had been dean for years, and he had more pull than he needed. And so I went down there and interviewed for it, only to find out I was the only candidate. And I got there because Hessler said I should. Now I'm at Tennessee. Okay?
Yeah, no, that's great.
You've been there a while?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by the clavarioids and your relationship with Corner.
Yes.
Yes? You want to say anything?
Corner had a personality, and as time went by, I learned more and more about the personality. But one of the things that Corner had said in publication was that he did not want to deal with these shriveled skeletons of specimens in the herbaria, and somehow I had gotten the idea that there were type specimens and that one ought to be careful about using types and that kind of nomenclature.
Oh, sure.
Well, we ran at right angles to one another, and we had a very interesting and profound communication for several years.
That's great.
You know his son,
Yes.
who saw him last when the son was 18 years old,
Yes, yes.
has written a book.
Yes.
Have you read the book?
I have not.
Okay.
Um,
My father
but I
in
had a
his
lot of
suitcase.
communication with his
The
son, John.
Yeah. He's been very interested in talking to mycologists.
Well,
Yeah.
it's only been very recently that I've gotten another glance into the history of World War II. And this has kind of awakened me again to the whole idea of Singapore. And my paragon, Marinus Anton Donk,
Doc.
Yeah.
okay? He was a prisoner of war, not a prisoner of war. He was a prisoner, not necessarily of war in Indochina, and being treated rather rudely by the Japanese. And over here was Corner in Singapore writing the clavarioid fungi book. And when John Jr. came out with his book, I was really kind of disinterested in it. But now I have awakened that history of World War II.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about Olive? Because I don't know very many mycologists that knew him well, and even Dr. Alex. And I think Dr. Alex might have been a little bit afraid of him. Was he a harsh person, or?
He was a removed person. He and Jeannie lived about a block and a half away from the building at Columbia, overlooking Morningside Park. and I never knew him to be active within the department socially at all. He had gotten his degree from North Carolina. North Carolina, maybe to this day, I don't know, was rather inbred. And so there was an opportunity for him to either stay or come back to North Carolina. And lo and behold, when I got to Tennessee, within a year, Chapel Hill was advertising for a mycologist, and I applied for the job. Little did I know that the other guy who was applying for the job was Lindsay Olive.
That maybe they had made the job.
Well, the thing, I would have been applying to as a beginning associate professor. He was looking at the endowed chair, the Keenan professor. And of course he got it and went back to North Carolina. But between Coker and Couch, he was a North Carolinian student. That was his life.
Right.
And every spring, we would have exams at Columbia, and as the last paper came in on that exam, Jeannie was down on the street in their Volkswagen waiting for him, and away they'd go down to Highlands where they owned a cottage, and so he was south. And that was a different kind of person. He had worked on jelly fungi for a while.
Yeah,
He
some
worked
in Louisiana.
on
some
nuclear
of
activity, nuclear behavior in the higher fungi and so forth. And it was only later that B.O. Dodge, the Neurospora man, was part of the Columbia group, and Olive found Sordaria, the little ascomycete that grows on dung,
Right.
and found out that he could put the spores, he could grow the thing under UV light, and he could get white ascospores and black ascospores.
New genera.
Yeah, new genus.
Right. And he could count them in the ascus,
Yeah.
2, 2, 2, 2, and
Yeah,
4, 4,
yeah.
and so forth. And that was what carried him on until finally he got into the cellular slime molds.
Yeah, how did that happen?
I don't really know, but he was a very great devotee of Tahiti. He and Jeannie went over there repeatedly. And I don't know whether that had anything to do with that, but I know the last couple of times they went, he was there ostensibly to collect cellular slime molds, not doing any genetics of ascomycetes.
Did he have any connection with Kenneth Raper? Because Kenneth,
They knew one
Raper-
another.
Yeah, I just wondered because Raper, I
Yes,
think,
yeah,
started a little
right.
bit earlier.
Well,
working
that's
with-
right. And before that even was a guy by the name of Carroll
Yeah.
W. Dodge.
Right.
And he had done what turned out to be some of the cellular slime molds, Acrasius and so forth.
No,
and so on.
was that
No, it was-
C.W. Dodge? That was
It was another.
Haskins.
Ed Haskins, yes.
He's much later, though, isn't
Was
he?
he?
I wondered, what did he do? Cellular slime molds, or did he do myxomycetes?
He did
Haskins
a
did
crazy
I thought he did
Okay.
kind of spraying.
Well, yeah, C.W.
Kind of
Dodge, I think of, because,
Medical.
well, he did the book on medical mycology, but he had done some earlier work that was kind of physiological with Duggar. And then C.W. Dodge came and was at the Farlow as a curator during the time that they were moving from after Farlow died, and they were moving into the new building, the old building, the building we are in now.
Yeah.
And he was responsible for much of the work in the collections and organizing things there. And then he went off to Missouri and worked on lichens and the Antarctic lichens and various other things. But he did the medical mycology book because Thaxter said, here's a way for us to make a mark here. He'd never worked in medical mycology at all, but they decided that he should do this medical mycology book. Anyway,
So
I'm
maybe
not
he
sure.
did somewhere work.
Essentially,
Well, he did the Goyman and Dodge
Yeah.
translation.
Yeah, that was very useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I'm
But
thinking of of Duggar now?
Duggar was at Missouri and did cultivated mushrooms and mushroom farming. And
Yes,
that kind of stuff.
what's rattling around was some guy went to the Farlow and was a curator, and as I read about this, I thought, this guy was not a curator by birth. He was not a taxonomist and a classifier and a collector and so forth, but I don't remember whether it was Duggar, and it sounds like it might have been.
Duggar was never at the Farlow.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who were you talking about? C.W. Dodge.
C.W. Dodge.
Okay, that's part of the plea that you need to edit out.
You've got plenty here to work on.
Okay, so what about another person you worked with, Hessler?
Hessler? A Hoosier.
Yeah, he was one of the Wabash guys.
Yes,
wasn't he?
exactly.
Yeah, went to Cornell.
Yes, exactly. And as we came by Crawfordsville on our drive up here, Karen got regaled by 15 minutes of that conduit.
Yeah, no, that was amazing.
Yeah, and just to add a little pepper on top, my first graduate student was a guy by the name of Paul Alexia, who pretty quickly wound up on the faculty at Kalamazoo College.
Yeah.
And he came out of Wabash. So here was Hessler and a bunch of other Wabash people coming into Cornell in the beginning of all of this. And here was Alexia at the very other end of the career.
Yeah.
And they must have let some others out of Cornell because Emory was Wabash, and he went to Michigan.
I didn't know that. That's terrific.
Yeah, he's from Crawfordsville.
Oh, okay. So he was
right there on the
inborn
spot.
guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, played jazz and on the piano in bars to put himself through school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So, what about your work in taxonomy?
I was going to say, I think it sounds like we're about finished now.
No, we haven't talked about your taxonomy.
The thing was that here I found myself in China, and I was supposed to be looking for clavarioid fungi, and it was dry. I was there with my graduate student, Wu Shuxin. She was working on something called Clavii corona, now called Artomyces. And she was finding stuff. And she decided that she needed to build herself a transfer hood out of a cardboard box and a Bunsen burner. Well, when she set flame onto her, here we're gifted with a lab that they were giving us, and here are these flames shooting up there. But at any rate, it was dry. But the one thing that was up was Pleurotus. And I decided, God's giving me this Pleurotus now, I better just seize it. And so we came back with, I suppose, 20 collections of Pleurotus, which led to single spore isolates of Pleurotus. And the next thing you know, that was the next 10 years or more of all different fungi. Now it was a different technique to collect fungi. You got to get a spore print so that you can dilute that down and so forth. So that if mating systems are genetics, then I guess I had a chapter at least.
At that time, that was very, very much so, I think. So I remember 2 talks of yours. One was Salome and the
Taxonomy and the seven
veils, yes.
And the other one was your presidential address, where we couldn't get into the room where the projector was, and you had to give it on the blackboard.
I remember that one as being somewhat different than what you suggest. Seems to me we did get in the room, but the projector didn't work. And I wound up doing mating squares.
Yeah.
Imagine a square, and imagine the plus signs up in this corner and this corner, and just about that time, the projector worked. And the audience was saved from another 3/4 of an hour of imaginary squares.
I think the chalk talk went really well. People still comment about it, those who were there. Were you there?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, were you there for the 7 veils?
Yeah, I was.
There are all kinds of reasons for talking about a talk.
The seven
Seven
veils.
I don't know whether you sent me a copy of the typescript I don't know why you would have had a
No,
copy
I
of it.
don't think I
But
did.
whatever it was, about 10 years ago, I finally recycled it. This was nothing but
No.
incrimination, and I better just get rid of it while I can.
But that was another period for you, thinking about nomenclature and history and frieze and all of that. How did
Yeah.
that happen?
Well, history has always been a thread through much of this. I've said before that my mentor and hero was M.A. Donk. And Donk was secretary of the Special Committee for Fungi and Lichens
Right.
for quite a while. And he died. And that's a story in itself, because I was supposed to go collecting with him, wound up in Germany, called the guy that was supposed to be my host, who told me in German that Donk is dead. And I had to say to him, Tode? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, he died. A year goes by, and I'm at Beltsville, and I'm in their herbarium, which was ill lit at that moment, and kind of down the basement of a building. I don't remember much about
yeah.
it. And I'm walking down between the cases and so forth, and a voice behind me says, Petersen, I need to talk to you. It was Franz Staffleur.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and I only knew Staffleur by name. I would not have deigned to extend my hand in hopes of a handshake. And so I turned around, and I didn't know who it was, and waited for this gentleman to come. And he said, I want you to be secretary of the nomenclature committee. And I said to him, I don't know that much about the position and so forth. Let me think about it. No, don't think about it. Just, I want you to be there. And so that was the next 10 years or 12 years was spent as secretary to that committee.
Yeah.
So that got you interested in history more.
I was thinking again, we were just about finished with this, weren't we?
We're not going to let you go.
There's a 10-second pause is.
We think slowly.
But we're double teaming here.
But I'm also thinking, I met Staffleur once, and I had brought a 6-pack of beer to Billy Turner's party.
And
he was
a good
there.
place to bring it.
And so everybody was drinking wine, and Staffleur and I sat at the kitchen table and drank my beer. So it was
Really?
yes.
He was a gin man,
He drank beer that day. There was no gin, so it was beer or wine.
and he suffered from terrible migraine headaches.
Yeah.
And so bad that he had to go underneath the bed in the hotel where he was staying just to get out of all of the light. And strangely, they found out rather late in his life that it was the brand of Gilbey's gin.
Huh.
And when he changed the
yeah.
label on the gin, he was okay.
Yeah. I knew him and met him lots of times because they would come to Harvard to
Yeah.
do the TL2 literature
Right.
search and so forth. So, we would escort them and take them to various libraries so
Yes.
that they could see all the literature
Absolutely.
and so forth.
Yep.
That is a pretty major piece of mycological history
yes.
too, that they, the first edition had no cryptogams, nothing but flowering plants.
The
of
one
TL2.
volume.
The one volume, and then they decided to include cryptogams, all these other groups, and I think by the time they got through the first volume, they thought, what did we do to ourselves? But it really is a fantastic reference.
I had, when I was at Columbia, I spent quite a bit of time, at least the summers. There was a woman by the name of Gertrude Burlingham.
Oh, yeah.
And she had endowed a Burlingham scholarship.
Russula and Lactarius. was what she
that
worked
was her
on.
game, right?
Yeah, that's what she worked on.
And it was in litigation, I guess her will or whatever it was. And just about the time I came up to some year in my graduate career where I had nothing but, I had no prospects for the summer and therefore no beans on the table, as they say.
Yeah.
And Clark Rogerson, another one of my mentors, said, you might be interested in a Burlingham endowment for the summer. Oh, says I. Oh. And it was almost like tailor-made. You know, I came this way, and
Yeah.
Gertrude Burlingham's litigation came this way, and there were the two of us together. But I graduated, and I had spent so many hours in the stacks at the New York Botanical Garden, and then I began hearing the same kinds of tales about Staffleur and Cowan. And they'd come, descend upon the New York Botanical Garden, and they'd spend 3 days in the stacks.
Yeah.
You know, here, photocopy this. Here, photocopy this. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah. No.
And
but-
now you can't get in the stacks. And if you don't think that pisses me off, you know, because at that time you could go in there and you could find 1828 literature and that much of it, and you didn't know that this, and this even existed. And there they were.
It's the discovery that you have when you're in the stacks, when you're looking. You find things that you didn't know existed. Sometimes you find things that the librarians didn't know
Right,
existed.
sure,
You know,
sure.
So
I've spent several hours looking at Bouillard,
that's
for
tough.
example, and writing an index to Bouillard. Unfortunately, I was indexing the wrong Bouillard, but that's the way that goes.
Yeah, there are many versions.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'm ready for the next.
What do you want to talk about?
No, I'm sorry, but I'm at your mercy.
Okay. Dr. Alexopoulos always told us that all of your students always got jobs in their area.
There were waves, you know. There was a wave that came out of Cornell. And if you looked around the country for 10 or 15 years, all of those positions were filled by Corf students from Cornell. That wave somehow subsided. There were jobs that Alex Smith's students accrued to. And then there was a wave, I didn't recognize it as such, when people used to say, you know, Petersen's students are all over the country. Yeah, they were. And they were a very eclectic bunch. You know, one of my favorite students is the same one we talked about before, Paul Alexia, who never taught a graduate course. He was in an undergraduate situation, and several of my students wound up that way. And I have so much respect for those people and the mission that they wanted to accomplish. They wanted to work with undergraduates. And that's so much different than I want to chase grants and have graduate students and have a worldwide horizon for my fieldwork or whatever the law allows.
Well, you know, I started out at Hope College, which is very near, Holland, Michigan's very near Kalamazoo.
Yes.
And I went and gave a seminar there once, but I couldn't take it. It's a hard life.
It is a hard life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was lucky to leave Hope and go to LSU. But sometimes I had like 30 hours, contact hours of teaching with the labs.
Absolutely.
And all. Yeah. So he stuck it out and did well.
Yes. One of the strange things that Karen and I observe all the time is on our campus, the difference between the teaching loads in, for example, ecology and evolutionary biology, our department, or physics, or chemistry. And then you go to history and sociology and Romance languages, and you want to see a teaching load.
Yeah.
And the dean complains because they're not getting grants. Well, okay, put them in the classroom for 3 different courses every semester, and you're not going to get very many grants.
Yeah. So, I guess
Can I die now?
you can die now. You've given your interview.
Got it.
Don't you dare. Not on our watch.
Now.